Add these fundamental sine waves together and you create something much more complex. So this is a way of describing sound events because, I mean, all this is well and good, but how does this relate to the real world? Okay, we're trying to describe sound events. We're trying to describe what we're hearing, right? So a way of describing a sound event, I'm going to call it a sound event, like me talking, me crashing a cymbal, hitting a guitar chord. This is a sound event that's created by an air disturbance. You're hearing it, right? But I'm describing it in terms of frequencies. I'll call this the frequency domain description of a sound event, right? Because we're talking about all the frequencies that go into making that sound. Oh, this is an interesting slide. This tells you the frequencies of various octaves and where they sit, which actually comes in handy when you're trying to use an EQ to change the tone of something. And so let's talk about that briefly, and we'll talk about it more when we get to EQs. But basically, you go get in your car tonight after class, you turn on the radio, and you add a little more bottom, and you add a little more high frequencies. What are you doing? You're exaggerating and changing the volumes of these harmonic structures. So you're manipulating the harmonic structure. You add some low end, you're adding more of the fundamental as compared to the upper harmonics. You add more high end, more sparkle in your sound, and you're adding more of the high frequencies of the harmonic content in balance. Everything's a balancing act between these frequencies. That's what you're doing when you twist an EQ. You're changing the harmonic structure slightly to make it more pleasing to your ear. When you manipulate the frequency domain picture of a sound and you add some high frequency, why does it sound better? It sounds better because your piano sounds more like a piano because it's the high frequencies in the harmonic structure that give it its character, right? So you go, oh, that's a piano, or that's an acoustic guitar. Because you're adding high frequencies, you're adding more of the high frequency harmonic content, which, as we said before, gives you the character or quality of the sound. If we add low frequency, we're adding more tonal quality to the sound. We're adding more fundamental frequency. So you can hear pitch better if you add low frequencies. You can hear quality of the sound of what you're hearing if you add high frequencies. That's why when you use one of these cheap mics to sing into, it doesn't have a good high frequency response. You sound a little muffled like that. It sounds lo-fi. But if you have a really good mic and you get all the upper harmonic content, then all of a sudden you can tell distinction in voices much better. You can tell distinction in sound much better. Your brain can unravel it. That's how you can understand what you're hearing best. So that's really important to know on a sort of a macro level instead of the micro level of what we've been talking about. In a macro sense, it's really important to understand that high frequency gives you more quality of the sound, so you understand what you're hearing better, and low frequency gives you more pitch information. The other thing is, in my little example with the square wave, you can see here in a complex waveform, if there are sharp corners, like the corners in a square, you can see that that's going to take very high frequency sine waves to fill that in and create that. So basically what that means is that square corners in a complex wave, like a sharp corner, would take more high frequency content to create it. If my waveform was not so square in terms of its, or edge-like in its content, well, this obviously would have a fundamental that's pretty big, pretty long. You don't need a lot of high frequency to create that sound. So your upper harmonics would be quieter, much quieter. So it's all about balance of the frequencies, these fundamental sine waves, and how they add together in terms of volume and in terms of frequencies to create various sounds. When you think of the first synthesizers, right, the Moog synthesizers, I remember I had a mini Moog. What they provided you with were 3 various oscillators that you could choose what frequency, what octave to make them generate a sine wave at, or a square wave, or a sawtooth wave. You had choices of what kind of frequency you wanted to come out of each oscillator. A square wave and a sine wave have different harmonic content. Sine wave has no harmonic content, it's one frequency, one sine wave. A square wave has much more, it's much more rich in harmonics. So you had 3 oscillators that could generate these things, and you would blend them together. And if you wanted to create a string sound out of these early synths, they never sounded like real strings, they sounded really synthy. But basically, they gave you a fundamental frequency and a couple harmonics is all you had. you didn't have the upper harmonics past that. And that's why it always sounded not totally real, but you could kind of think that it was a string, or maybe it was a horn or a flute, based upon how you combine these limited amount of oscillators. They got around the simplicity of just 3 sine waves by giving you the option of making them square waves, so you have all that extra harmonic content with each oscillator. That was the beginning of synthesis, being able to understand sound as a combination of frequencies that you could recreate. It's called additive synthesis. But the other interesting thing about it is every sound has an infinite series of sine waves. We were trying to create an infinite series, but we had to fall short because we had limitations, technical limitations with the early synthesizers. But every sound has full harmonic structure, depending on the volumes and the frequencies. So let's just say we're talking about a low drum, right? Even a low drum has high frequencies in it, even though the low frequencies are much louder than the higher frequencies. Let's talk about a cymbal. Lots of high frequency. But it also has low frequencies. It has low fundamental frequencies too. So it goes down into where a low drum would go in terms of its frequency content, but it's much less of it. So the thing to take away is that every sound has a full spectrum of frequencies. It's just in balance as to how it makes it sound and which frequencies are chosen. That'll get into week 10 when we start talking about mixing and combining sounds and how to combine all these sounds together as to how to make them work together and not step on each other sonically. So you can manipulate these spectrums to get the kinds of sounds you want, but you also have to remember when you're making music, there's more than just one sound. It's not just one perfect kick drum sound. It's how that sound combines with all the rest of the sounds sonically. So now you're seeing this is not as simple as it might seem with a couple sine waves. It's really complex because every sound has a complex amount of high frequency content and harmonic structure associated with it, and how those frequencies all blend together with other sounds.